Good morning, everybody, to this webinar about climate services as emerging markets. I'm Andrea Geier-Scholz and I'm with Smart Cities Consulting. We are partner in the Clarity Project. Just some introductory and organizational issues. Please make your questions via the chat window or the chat or the question window of your webinar dashboard. We will try to answer as many of them as possible during this webinar. However, no question will be lost. We will compile and complete a Q&A collection and share it in retrospect. After the webinar, you will receive a follow-up package with links to all mentioned content and with the presentations, additional events that may be interesting for you, and the information how to join. The webinar will be recorded, and of course the recording will be available, and you are invited to share it as well if you think it's useful. So let me introduce our speakers very brief and our agenda. So we have Adrian Perels. He will give a keynote on climate services market. Then it will be me introducing the collaboration platform that we delivered within the Clarity Project. And then we will start the panel discussion. Panel participants will be Tam Lee, Stefania Manca, and Alessia Pietrosanti, and they will introduce themselves at the beginning of this session. In the background, the back office, we have Gerald Schimek from Austrian Institute of Technology, and he will deal with your questions and make sure that it's as good as it goes. So now let me give the stage to Adrian Perels from the Finnish Institute of Meteorology. Adrian, I will make you moderator.
Okay, thank you. Good morning also on my behalf. My name is Adrian Perels from the Finnish Meteorological Institute, where I work as research professor and among other things, the economic evaluation of meteorological services, including climate services, one of my research fields. I've been working in and leading the EU Max project, cooperating, for example, with one of the panelists who was leading the Marco project. I make this presentation on personal title, even though, of course, I'm drawing on several of these projects and all kinds of other information. And thank you for the invitation to present in this webinar. So I try to give a quick overview of, let's say, the current conditions regarding the market structure of climate services. So let's first delineate it a bit, and already the word market is a bit tricky. I will get back to that in a moment. Let's start with the notion of a climate service, because we all know that's even interpreted in many ways. We really start, as many do, with the so-called roadmap definition, and I like to emphasize that in this case, it still should also mean, that's how I see it, that climate data should still constitute an essential basis of such a service, even though really a lot of other kind of information and skills may be added down the value chain. That's really important, but it should be like that, that the quality, the meaningfulness of the service should also really dependent on climate data. Otherwise, you may have all kinds of other climate policy relevant information services, but then we don't see them anymore in this case as a so-called climate service. Indeed, on the one hand, you see interpretations that really emphasize sort of the upstream start, sort of the sourcing of the climate data. So we're talking about climate service in terms of climate statistics, reanalysis, seasonal services, multi-annual, so the different temporal stages, for example, that one wants to present or project. On the other hand, from a user perspective, in fact, one may wish to talk about other things, about what are critical thresholds, so to integrate it in existing risk tools, urban hotspot projections, scenario analysis, etc., etc. That's directly already very important indeed to to understand that from a user perspective, it's inserted into planning and scanning processes. It also, what we can see, if you look to the right-hand side of this picture, which is a sort of simplified summary of value chains. So you can distinguish several segments in the production of climate services. So more upstream, it's observation and modeling. There are even some of the people active in this field see that it's a sort of as a boundary case, partly outside the climate services. So they would think that the actual climate service is more in the center, a bit more to the right. But partly you could say that decisions and investments made in observation and modeling are partly also steered by needs for developing climate services. And even there are even options to build business models that are based on monitoring, for example, that really start from the observation structure, in fact. Yeah, and then you see different kind of players in this field, and some players in principle can cover a big part of the value chain, but may not do that in all cases. And we see originally it was, of course, really a more public sector dominated area, but ever more, of course, there's also private firms and also all kinds of public-private collaborations coming up. But that is still more scattered, you would say, and even also some NGOs and also, of course, universities play a role. Another important feature is indeed to realize that if you go down the value chain, so to speak, the position, the role of non-climate data and non-climate skills gets ever more important. That's really essential to realize in a lot of ways. So even though we have ever more experience, and there are some fields where you could say that the markets start to really show already more, well, perhaps not maturity yet, but already has really gone through a significant development. There are also all kinds of segments where the market is still like nascent. Indeed, you can see this structuration also in upstream, midstream, downstream is sort of emerging. And midstream means more like clustered cooperation on certain issues, certain tool families, and that kind of things, for example. Another element is economies of scale and scope, which are very important in this kind of services, and which also means that we can still expect a lot of dynamics in this market, because it means you can create enormous benefits by being able to combine very similar kind of services. So we may still see a lot of new initiatives, and then over time these things get merged and whatever. And indeed, I will later say something about obstacles to uptake. So even though there's happening a lot, and even though we are convinced that this is important, in practice we see that there are all kinds of user segments that so far have not been using climate service to the extent that would be desirable. Another element of that often shows that people often think, of course, from their own position and not realizing that climate services and the climate service market may cover other things than they would have realized. Yes, there is a part of climate service that is really charged, so that's the easiest way to see it as a market. But there are also uncharged climate service, of course, mainly in the public sector, which still are delivered on a sort of on a case-by-case basis. So you can identify delivery, and that is still recognizable as a market, you could say. Even in the private sector, to some extent, there's a sort of business model that a part of the services, of course, is free in order to make new customers, for example, familiarize with the options in the hope that then later on they start to buy also charged services. However, there are also public duties produced by some public agencies for other public agencies or ministries, which are really outside any kind of market mechanism. On the other hand, you have a lot of R&D activities. Up to now, even a lot of what we call the market is in fact R&D, so it's still research and development. A lot of piloting, so it's sometimes near actually market functioning already, but in fact still belongs here. And this is another reason why different actors may have wider and narrower views on what is now the climate services market. Another thing is indeed that we have to realize that climate services are not only about adaptation, and also indeed the prime driver for the users may not be adaptation. It may be an additional element, but we see, for example, especially of course in the seasonal climate services, that operational resilience of preparedness for coming months or years is really a very important segment, and may also be a way to learn to develop preparedness also for the longer term. So these seasonal services may sometimes be also an alley, an entry towards developing, getting to know the options to use climate services also for adaptation, for example. And then, of course, there are also mitigation issues, like in renewable energy. You have also to account for the variability of climate conditions in the functionality of renewable energy resources. And then sustainable development goals are also another reason, for example, why climate services may be used. And of course, there are combinations, and also this evolves over time. If we look to the roadmap, which we should be very grateful for this, because this, of course, helped a lot to organize our thoughts, and was also an important effort to realize that it's not just about climate data, but a lot of more translation steps and whatever. But looking to it again, and referring to this picture that I showed earlier, one realizes that even in this picture, in fact, there is a sort of underrating of the significance of these non-climate data. So climate data information, or non-climate data and information and tools and expertise is not only sort of within this process, but is also imported from other sources sideways, and also through the end users, their own organizations is put into. So the role of these elements should, I think, get, for example, more attention in what it means in the evolvement of the climate services market. There's also, because indeed, if you look to this picture, there's still a bit this idea that we start with the climate data and then some end up with end user, fulfilling end user needs. But in fact, you can do it in several ways. So this is what I was showed in the previous picture, also earlier, which is the sort of the first standard idea of how things are developed. An alternative is, take, for example, the built environment and the building material and equipment design, so that whole sector, which is very relevant both for mitigation and adaptation. That, of course, has enormous amount of own skills and data which are used to design, to plan cities, to design new areas, to design buildings and whatever. And there are also a lot of expertise organizations functioning for that. And what you, for example, can see that various of these consultancies in those sectors, and even academic institutes more active in that area, also start to provide climate services as a means of expanding their portfolio. And for a part of the end users, that may be really a very attractive offer, in fact, because they want many end users want, for example, to have a more complete servicing of their risk management, or they want, of course, a complete satisfying design of their building or city part, and climate is then just one issue in that. So no wonder that some of these providers here may be very successful in sort of penetrating the climate service market from the side. Another line of development that you can see is building on observation systems in relation to monitoring, for example, vulnerability and damage risks and whatever. So partly this has really to do with shorter term resilience, but it can be extended also to understanding what is the longer term resilience of an area. And also there you see already business models using this kind of systems. One of the problems or one of the challenges in climate services is that originally one may think, and of course the upstream climate data are usually public goods, sort of they, even though not every country is abiding to open data rules to the same extent, but it's usually a public agency that produces and processes these data, and to a very significant extent, these data are also freely available. Think, for example, of the Copernicus system, even though it may need a lot of skills before you actually can use them. On the other hand, of course, we see that for particular companies, there can be, as a private service, be created climate service. Take, for example, sort of seasonal hurricane forecast for the industry, for the insurance industry, for example, or also snow certainty, for example, is another example for which the weather system is an example. But then there are these intermediate systems. So because what you see is, due to co-design needs and also to co-use needs, in fact, you see this intermediate products a lot. So club goods and common pool resources. A club good means that that you exclude. You can exclude all users, only the members of the club can benefit from it, which is not the case in a public good. That's sort of available for everybody. But the benefits one can steer to the ones that are in there. But then indeed, that also has the advantage that everybody in the club gets a good service. That is the advantage of this in this case. It's also used in other contexts with environmental degradation, but let's leave that for a moment. The other element is a common pool resource, which would mean that one cannot exclude other users so easily, but one wants to try to maximize the spillover effect. So there is more openness in the data then. But the risk may be indeed that if there is too much use, you start still to feel that there is some degradation. And for each of these options, there are different kind of business models how you have to use this. On top of that, we can see that due to increased cooperation, but also thanks to new options in data sharing and citizen-based observation, all these things, that all these differences start to blur as well. So you see innovations that at the same time also mean that the public good may not be totally public anymore, and a private good may not be totally private anymore. And that is a challenge for what kind of business models fit for this. There are all kinds of ideas for this, but this also in fact needs still exploration to come to models that are really vital. What did we learn in the recent past? We can still see indeed that that is still continued. The public provision is still dominant, but the private provision is coming up. And then there, of course, there are these mixed models which are also coming up, but it's still harder to identify properly in statistics or surveys. So these are results for different surveys and different projects. What we see also, interestingly, that public providers tend to serve public users more, and on the other hand, private providers tend to provide, especially service private users more. It's not a black and white, but there is this clear tendency. Another element that we see is both here and here is that because there's still a strong discussion about sort of the technical qualities of the climate data, and that remains important because in a lot of cases it is very desirable that uncertainty ranges go down and the abilities to have better spatial and temporal resolutions would still create a lot of benefits. But at the same time, we see that it's not only that, or it's that, but in combination with other features. And all the time, in fact, the feedback is saying that there should be more care for that the provided information really fits into the decision-making processes that we have as user or end user. All these answers, a lot of these answers sort of emphasize that in different ways. Another element in the discussion about free data and that everything should be public. And an interesting feature that came up in an EU Max survey was that, in fact, it was not a very large amount of answers, like 40 or so, but on this question. But nevertheless, it was indicated even if the service as such is free, in fact, the overall use of this new amount of information is not free for the user. They often have to do a lot of other extra efforts, perhaps even buy new software or whatever, or even perhaps hardware, to be able to actually benefit from this new information. And that whole effort, perhaps also new skills, acquire new people, and that is not cost-free. And often that is seen as a much bigger possible threshold or problem than whether the climate service as such would cost something. Okay, now going a bit further into these obstacles, we distinguished 3 types of obstacles: so at the demand side, at the supply side, and then there is also the actual matching process. The demand side means that has often to do with motivations of the different types of users. So it could be that that if it's a very short-term oriented kind of business, that one thinks that it's not so necessary to have this kind of information. Another, especially in smaller organizations, the risk management process may be rather simple. So in the beginning, they may not know how to use the information, in fact. Of course, in some cases, there's still lack of awareness, but we really notice that is sort of dwindling. And perhaps most importantly, there are really sectors that so far saw that there are not so many incentives. They don't need to do it. And if there would be risks, they are able to roll off the risks to others. And that suggests typically that you need regulation to repair that kind of problems. At supply side, it often have to do with sort of the user orientation of what the supplier is offering. And okay, that has to do partly with business models and partly with doing more effort in thinking about what are in fact your users and who do you want to reach. And to some extent, it may have to do with the funding possibilities for further development of climate services. And then, of course, there are really the matching things to do. It's hard to find the right provider. So for a lot of new users, of course, this whole field is not very transparent. And also even for suppliers, it may be difficult to understand what would be the potentially interesting users for them. And then there are still things about that you may find out that after all, a product is, even though it looked like the right product, afterwards not as useful as you thought it would be. So also then you start to talk about quality assurance and good communication of what a product actually can offer. If we now look to, so it's obvious that this field is growing, but I don't know whether you can call it spectacular. Also, we did, based on the surveys and interviews we had at the private side, for example, the climate service providers indicated, yeah, it is interesting and it's significant, but perhaps not spectacular, the growth that you can see. Then in EU Max, we also tried an assessment. There have been several, also in Marco and other projects have, of course, been attempts to assess what is now the size of the climate services market. And that is very hard, as we indicated earlier, because a part of the provision is really through public delivery channels where the value is not explicitly measured, and in a part of the cases is even not attributable. And there may, as we indicated earlier, there may be all kinds of reasons why how the climate service market is defined, how wide or how narrow it is seen. This is an attempt used, in fact, starting from sort of damage functions at a very large scale, in fact, and then arguing back that foreseen damage incites all kinds of actors to prevent that to some extent. And then we know something from another kind of weather-related evaluation system. We have some idea what is typically the benefit cost ratio of that kind of services, and we use that to assess this. So of course, with rising global temperature, you get more damage. And then there may be different fractions of what the climate service providers may get from the benefits produced. And then there is finally the element of the climate service support policy, how effective that is, what may happen. I don't want to go too far in this. So indeed you see growth, but how big this market now is still quite unsure for all kinds of reasons. This is also in fact in another way in the article by Tart and others based on the Marco project, in fact, where there was an interesting question, to what extent would an organization or user in fact use in-house climate service production if that would be possible? And the overall indication is that it's in fact quite high. And that would mean that the market, like using an outside service provider, would in that case be smaller if the capabilities for that would increase. So if there would be more free tools available, if the skill level overall is increasing, you may get sort of unexpectedly, even though the whole field is increasing, but the actual market may be growing less than expected. Because to this effect, that's why the word stealth is here. So we indeed look to also to different kind of business models, because it's really essential. That is really one of the important recommendations, that especially public providers should think much better on what is the business model for which that they use for a climate service, or rather for a cluster of very closely related climate services. In what way are they resourcing it? How are they addressing the potential customers? How are they dealing with learning, feedback, and all these things? And that depends indeed on the context in which they're operating. So they have to be more aware of that and use that in the design of these business models. That means partly because it's really uncertain, also because a significant part of these provisions and designs have to be done in collaboration. So there may be really new situation in that respect. So this would also typically be a topic that would make sense to allow for explorations, but then report on the results and make the results available for everybody, so we can all learn from these explorations. Right, some concluding observations. So yeah, there is not only one good way, even if you have a particular climate service in mind, there may be alternative ways how you actually can generate that, and then the selection of what is the choice you make in the value chain should be sensitized to, on the one hand, the abilities and the nature of the organization, and on the prevailing market conditions. Also recognize the difference between the service development and delivery, even though in a part of the cases these things may be integrated to some extent. It's still like that the skills and staffing, perhaps also the kind of partners in the collaboration you need, is changing if the emphasis starts to move from development to delivery. And that's also something, for example, you can see that then in as such technically really successful pilots may have been forgotten to realize that you may need other partners to develop them for delivery. Indeed, standardization still is also a very important issue. Also in the Journal of Climate Services was a very good article based on the Climate Europe efforts in this respect. And of course, networking in all kinds of organizations. I mentioned here a few is important to promote all these notions that I presented before. Here are some references and some suggestions of useful websites. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adrian. It was really thrilling, and I'm really excited, and I was totally sucked into your presentation, because it is a very good rationale for something that we have in mind on ourselves, and that I'm going to present you now. So I want to direct your attention to the European Climate Services Collaboration Platform and Marketplace, myclimateservices.eu. It is one of the key results of the Horizon 2020 project Clarity, and it intends to foster innovation with climate services and their exploitation beyond the Clarity project. And it will be an attempt to address some of the hurdles that Adrian just mentioned. So not only pilots, but replication and partnering for delivering and for extending the whole value chain. So these are the topics that shall be addressed. On the slide, you can see the logos of our project partners. They are from Sweden, from Germany, from Austria, Spain, and Italy, from north to south. And in 4 of the countries, except Germany, Clarity has demonstration cases in 4 municipalities, and 1 relevant also for transportation infrastructure. So we cover a pretty good chain. So why digital marketplace? Why did we think about developing something like that? I have to tell you about the Clarity that one main intention was to develop an online service for free that allows to make a localized climate risk screening. It will be, of course, not at all a substitute for a proper climate study, but it will give you an estimation what you have to expect in the future. And it will help you to direct your attention and your resources, of course, accordingly, and find experts to help dealing with them, be it an extended study or adaptation measures or something else. In case you are wondering now, yes, we managed to develop this. And there will be webinars on that too, and we will give you information in the follow-up package. We realized that such a service will only have impact if it will be available on a larger scale, and that we will not be able to manage that on our own. So as Adrian mentioned, collaboration, service delivery, teaming up. There will be a need for local data and, of course, for expertise on several kinds of hazards, and, of course, for implementation of adaptation measures, and also for mitigation. This is why we developed the idea of a digital platform as an exchange for data and services to join forces and to advertise expertise and best practices and have showcases to show others what could be done. This marketplace will be, so the matching will be complemented by useful services to advance the members of the community further. For instance, by spreading the word in a media format and with capacity building and education later on. So what is the underlying concept of this marketplace? First, it gathers and presents climate services like data, digital tools, expert studies, as well as tangible solution for climate adaptations. There are not only offers presented, but also requests and best practices. These will be projects from cities, regions, and enterprises who are looking for climate services or who are showcasing their best efforts and their successful utilization and implementation. Second, offers and demands will be matched and possible collaborations will be ignited. This can start at a very early phase of a project or merely an idea arising. Third, the usefulness is increased by community features like a media, we call it a web scene, that reinforces promotional content, as well as event organization and management of events. And as mentioned before, education is a future plan for bringing this platform further. The gist is that the content is global to enable technology and know-how transfer beyond regions and states and sectors. However, there needs to be a strong regional focus on end user level. Targeted users comprise urban planners, spatial planners, architects, but also the building sector, construction engineering companies, real estate development, of course, financing, energy supply or energy and the energy sector, and of course, consultants, including the ICT sector for digital tools and services. And of course, the whole innovation community will be considered, so research and development and innovation experts from all sectors and policymakers on regional and on national level, and of course on European level as well. Okay. So I mentioned some spreaded sort of offer that we can make. And the big picture will be a climate services portal that will integrate all of this and that will act as an entry point. You will get there by entering myclimateservices.eu in your browser, and there you can, and then you are directed further. So you can, as this mentioned before, describe climate services offerings on the marketplace and find collaboration partners. You can promote your solutions and references on the web scene. There will be an editorial scope on different launched climate-related topics to increase visibility and to provide the proper framework for your contributions. And you can advertise and organize events and look for interesting events to attend. This functionality you experienced by yourself because you registered for this webinar through our platform. You need to register and to become an active member to get full access to the features and of course to contribute and to advertise your services and look for partnerships. So let's have a short glimpse at the marketplace now. I will skip this and show you a little bit. So this is one of the main screens where you can see offers. So you can browse climate service offerings like datasets, digital tools, and consulting and expert services. The relevance can be managed by setting filters like region or addressed climate hazards like heat or flooding events or elements at risk that may be infrastructure or the population of a region. These filters are related to the workflow that is implemented in the Clarity digital screening tool that I mentioned before, and is inspired by the European non-paper guideline for project managers making vulnerable investment climate resilient, and it was provided by the DG Climate Action. So as I mentioned before, the full use is available for registered and logged in users only. You create a profile and with your user credentials, you have full access to the functionalities. As a non-registered user, you can only see what you see here and a brief description of the service, but you cannot interact. So now we had a little bit of theory. and I liked to give you a glimpse at the marketplace itself by providing a video.
Welcome to myclimateservices.eu. My name is Chris Climate, and in this video I introduce you to the My Climate Services Marketplace. The Marketplace is at the heart of the Clarity project on climate adaptation. Here you can present your solutions and find new partners for your products. Or you can use the expertise of our members and find solutions to your current problems. In the My Climate Services Marketplace, you can network with competent partners and create collaborations for adaptation to climate change. But how does that work? To use the My Climate Services Marketplace, you'll first need a Clarity account. You can find out how to create such an account in the video at the top right of the page. If you have an account, first log in with your user data. Very good. You now have the choice between offers and opportunities. Under offers, you can create solutions for climate adaptation that you have already implemented yourself. This means that you are offering a solution for a specific problem. Project planners and climate experts with a similar problem can inform themselves about your approach and, if necessary, contact you for a project request. I will explain how such an offer is created in the next video. The other possibility, you are still looking for the solution to a specific problem. In this case, go to the field Opportunities. If you are working on a current project, select the Projects field. Here you can enter detailed information about your project and your problem. Your project will then be matched with the current offers on the My Climate Services Marketplace, and suitable solutions will be suggested. I will explain how to create such a project in the next video. Finally, you can start a call for collaboration. For example, if you are looking for a partner for a specific project, or more generally, for a new service of your company. You can view and manage your current offers, projects and calls for collaboration under the My Account field. If you want more information on climate adaptation, please subscribe to our account. Thank you very much for your attention. Your Chris Climate.
What is the status of the marketplace right now and or the platform right now, and what is planned for the future? The marketplace, so this matching and collaboration tool, is online as a development version, and it's ready for beta users. And I invite all of you to become some of the first users outside of the project group immediately and contribute to detect failures and give feedback on the functionality, and also make suggestions for features that you deem useful. The features of the platform itself will be extended with climate services training and capacity building features for target user groups. And we are hoping for input and feedback from you in that respect, and for ideas. So maybe we can have some co-creation on that together. The business model is subscriptions right now. So this year utilization will be free for all users. It is planned to implement real data market features and digital market features. It is estimated to start in the second half of the next year with it, because there is a lot of development to perform in advance, and the rules are not so crystal clear right now, and the sector is liquid right now. If this will be managed, this will allow for a wide uptake of available local data with fair sharing conditions and fair remunerations for data owners. And this will lead to other diverse and interesting business models, and it will also foster, or we hope that it will foster, wider uptake and spread also in terms of, you can imagine, science communities or citizen science by sharing data that you have in your possession. And another important development step, as I mentioned before, for the concerning the regional focus, there shall be developed regional hubs that are implemented in the respective language and culture, and consider, of course, the regulatory frameworks, and simultaneously have access to the full global marketplace database and technology and services underlaid, and enable trans-regional know-how and solution transfer. So these hubs need to be created locally, and we are actually looking for partners. So please, if you are interested and can envisage to accompany us on that path, please contact me directly and just drop me a note. What we have else is, so this is a compilation of links related to the marketplace. You need not take a note. You can download that from the it's provided as a handout, and of course we will provide it later on. And now I can say thank you for being with me, and we are looking for your feedback and hope that many of you will become early users, and that the more specific hand-on workshops will take place, and that will be more like tutorials. And I hope that you will join on that again. And aside from that, don't hesitate to get in touch to deal with your ideas on climate service provision and exploitation and expectation for that more detailed. Next on the agenda is the panel discussion, starting with the introduction of our panelists. In the meantime, so Alessia, please prepare to make your presentation. I will make you presenter now.
Thank you.
Start sharing and sharing my screen. And maybe in the meantime, are there actual questions we can deal with, Gerard?
Yeah, hello. We have got a question from Dimitri. A question to Adrian. He asks from your experience, Adrian, how often economic models are used as elements of climate service development process, and when so, to what extent economic models used fit for the development of climate services?
Of course, there are all kinds of economic models, so this is even not so easy to answer precisely. Yes, they are used, but perhaps not so much yet, because in the first place, it may already be quite a challenge to assess what would be the impacts in a more physical or natural sense, or technical, for example. So in the first place, it would be that you want to understand what happens to crop yields or something, or what happens to heat stress in a city, or what happens to river discharge and all that kind of questions. If you go from the pure climate information to already impacts that get relevant to handle certain risks and opportunities, that's one step. And then the next step then to assess what would be the economic implication of that. Yeah, you can see it for well-described systems. Like you may see it in logistics or transport, in the electricity market, for example, if there is really a joint market, and for example there is a lot of weather-related production like hydropower or wind, there you see options, and then the implications, and also in fact the effectiveness of the service as such, there you see already attempts to assess how valuable it is. So what amount of damage or loss you could avoid, and how good the service is to avoid that. You can see that. On the other hand, of course, for long-term projections, so if you talk about climate change scenarios, there are of course these, but that's in fact another category. Of course, you have these global models, integrated assessment models that try to assess what will be the long-term macroeconomic losses in case of certain pathways of emission levels in the future and certain adaptation levels. So what would happen to national and the global economy. But they are very, this latter type is sort of very indicative only. So there is still a lot of option to develop that much better than what has happened up to now.
Okay, thank you very much, Adrian, for answering.
There will be the opportunity. So I have to look a little bit on the schedule, but it's so interesting what you provide and what you're asking as well. There will be the opportunity for your questions towards the end in the framework of the panel discussion. Please direct your questions to the panelists via the Q&A window or the chat as well. And as I promised, we will deal with all of the questions, at least at the latest in the retrospect and the follow-up panel. So Alessia, can you start?
Good morning. Please? Can you hear me okay? So good morning from rainy Brussels. My name is Alessia Pietrosanti. I'm with the European Commission and I'm working in the implementation of the Research and Innovation Framework Program in the area of climate adaptation and climate services. So I guess you're able to see my screen and my presentation. I want to give you just a brief overview of the rationale and the vision behind the framework program financing the development of a market for, or supporting the development of a market for climate services, and what are the instruments for doing that. So I guess there the reference document is the Research and Innovation Roadmap for Climate Services, where this vision was openly in a pretty straightforward manner laid down. And here I would like to see that this document is really marked a sort of paradigm shift on how the research priorities, research innovation priorities were identified. So here really with this document we try to move the focus from supply, from climate research, from a provider-oriented agenda to the demand, so to move towards solution and then so to say demand-driven agenda. And this document that most of you are familiar with clearly mentions some challenges regarding the emergence of a market for climate services and identify some priority action that have been used as an input for the framework program to call for projects. And many of these projects have been funded for around 90 million euro budget, and then really it's a conservative number referring only to the purely climate services project, but there are much more projects that are dealing with this issue, only to mention the ERA4CS, the Aeronet scheme, for example. And then it's not by chance that two coordinators from the first of their kind market research on climate services are sitting here in this panel today, Adrian and Tantam. So it was something really innovative at the time. What was the rationale for this? But we noticed basically that better science or improved knowledge of the climate system or the climate impacts of adaptation solution was not turning necessarily in better adaptation on the ground, in better resilience in operation, for example. So we realized that there was scope for a research and innovation program to tackle really the last mile of the provision of the services and to really go to demand side and shift towards a user-oriented product. So the motto of that roadmap was really to have user-driven and science-informed action. And the idea was in that sense to stimulate a market. And I would like to mention that we saw as two main pillars for this market creation. And one is the delivery of a public delivery of an authoritative layer of data and data product on climate. I'm referring to the huge investment in Copernicus climate change services. And other national centers that can provide this layer, the necessary massive amount of data in order to develop services. So this was, let's say, a pillar of public investment in climate services development. On the other hand, in order to have customized product that would serve the specific need of the individual user categories, there was need to invest a bit on the, as I say, the last mile of the value chain, so to invest a bit on the innovation part. And this is where the Horizon 2020 grants were aiming at. The overall idea was to support the generation of economic value, minimizing the risk of climate change and the risk of the impact, and seizing the opportunities that climate change can also bring about. So all in all, this vision is still very, very valid. Is the one that you see in the European Green Deal. So to see the knowledge and information at the center of this transition towards a more resilient and climate neutral economy. And it's not only about better knowledge, but is to turn this knowledge in action, in actionable product. And this is still the spirit of this enabling a market grow, the growth of climate services. And I'll take the opportunity to mention that there are linked to the Green Deal, there will be an extraordinary call for proposals on research and innovation, call for proposal, where again the area of adaptation and services and user-oriented services are to be funded, to be supported. Here you find the links to the text of topic that were sent for public consultation, so they are not the final one, but the call should be published in September. So there will still opportunity to support the replication upscaling of climate services. And I'll leave it the rest for the discussion, of course. Thank you.
So may I ask Stefania to present her course, please?
Indeed.
So you're moderator now?
Yeah. First of all, I'm happy to be here. So thank you for inviting me. And now I'll show you
with us and for confirming.
Yeah. I hope you can see my screen. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So first of all, today I'm here with two hats on my hand, on my head, because I am both. I am a representative of a municipality. So on one hand, an end user, and on the other hand, maybe a provider of data and usable information to deploy new climate services. On the other hand, I'm the coordinator, I'm honored to be the coordinator of the Urban Agenda Partnership on Climate Adaptation. So I'm part of this big mechanism, a new one, that is a partnership based on, first of all, on a voluntary commitment, as all the people that are involved in the urban agenda for the EU. This main commitment starts in 2016 under the development of the Pact of Amsterdam. It was an informal agreement on the Ministry of the Urban Matters. And that Pact of Amsterdam foreseen 12 partnerships for 12 main crucial issues for the EU to better assess a regulation and better funding and better knowledge paradigm. The climate adaptation was one of that main theme. And in the last 2 years, 2 more partnerships were developed, one on the security items and the other instead on the cultural and cultural heritage protection. In Just to show you who we are, this is our partnership. And as you can see, we are not only local authorities involved, but there are the member states representative and the European Commission representative, and also other European organizations as observer and also contributor in the works that we move on and we carry on. And also we have officially stakeholder that has been engaged in our work. What is foreseen from a partnership in the urban agenda? To develop, first of all, an orientation paper just to better take the issue and better focus the action, and to deliver an action plan. We start working in 2017, and we were supposed to deliver an action plan in 1 year, and so we did it. That action plan, now I'll show you, but really, really fast and furious, consists on 10 actions. When you invite me, and I'm very grateful, I see so many linkage in what we discussed during this year and what we try to address during this year that I show you here is in a simple way, I hope. So we put all of this together, and how you can see that data and observation, but especially data, are an enabling factor, so transversal, so useful, but so also difficult to manage at a different scale. That was essential for us to better assess them from the different perspective of the governance and planning for the risk knowledge and assessment on how to dial, how to work is properly for municipalities that are on the front line to cope and to work and to dial with the climate emergency issue, and they are also that one that has to shift paradigm from coping to preventing, and how to deal with the issue of the resources. Resources are available, but how to better ensure that cities and the network of the people that work with them could better use them, how to spend them, and how to better use the metrics on adaptation, because mitigation has some clear metrics and indicators that you can use. But on adaptation is not so easy, because it terms and it uses long-term provisioning and planning period that is so different from especially the political time scale. They have a political cycle mandate is short, so they have to decide today for what would happen in the future, and this was one of the main issues that we try to deal with. And especially in the field of the climate-related risk, we deal with all of them, we assess them, and try to find a way to solve eventually with some giving the property use of some instruments that already exist, and fostering exactly what was told before, new perspective on new market opportunities. So we are really happy to see how many projects deal with this, but also in our partnership, how many partners also deal with this issue. And just to tell, our focus in this case, as I told before, was exactly on dealing with vulnerability assessment. So how to be sure to take into consideration all the vulnerabilities, especially thinking to not a single hazard to which we are exposed, but also to dealing with the combination of multiple hazards, and how to achieve climate resilience and climate proofing also on the combination of them, because this is something that is more or less quite new, and how to deal with the risk management system that has to be changed in not only to the response paradigm, to which by experience all cities are more or less familiar, because they face continuously problems, and maybe they are really brave, and also they are really how can I say, they have experience in coping, okay, and in responding, but not so huge experiences in anticipating the adverse effect of the climate change, because they have no not all the cities has the same possibilities. And so how to help especially the small cities to not only to learn from the big one and the medium-sized one, but also to know how to apply for achieving innovation in their own context, because the climate is a global issue, but the effects are so local and so differentiated by the different perspective and the different geography and the different condition, economic possibilities, and so on, that in my mind there is an extreme power for the climate services development, especially from the public, the private, the sort of the mixed one. So the combination on using new kind of procurement among these parties, jointly working together. And just to focus only on, because I have 3 minutes or longer, these are the 10 actions that we are implementing right now. This action, it was asked to the partnership to develop action for the EU. So how to give voice to the cities to speak loud and clear to the EU, trying also to learn how to speak to the EU Parliament, to the EU that has to take a proper decision, because a city could act on its own, it depending on its ability to reshape. But the capacity building of a city depends upon other partners, that are the partners of the public bodies different, so the region, the member states, and moreover the European Commission guidelines, and they track the routes, they track the roadmap for us, for our future development, and they ask us to be committed in doing things we would like to do. But to better assess our capacity, we need something more. We need to have clear and open access to data, first of all. But also we need partners that help us to do what we missed during time, the capacity to analyze that data and to give to the politician simple instruments and simple capacity to read what that data will represent. On the other hand, you can see, so they are simple, well, in the title, not so simple in the working and in the dialing with, but in general, we try to address the regulation using the funding action and also the knowledge one. It is incredible. My partner told to me during all time on the work, there are so many things that has been done, so many platforms, so many useful best practice. There is a lot of things done in climate fields, adaptation and mitigation, and my question was to them, so now why we are at this stage? Maybe there are some missing points. And so we exactly would like to do what you are trying to do, creating the proper value chain. And I'm so incredible interested in what Alessia told you before, and in what also Adrienne told you before. There is space and time to develop the proper and appropriate measure and tools, because there are a lot of tools, but not so tailored for the city needs, because we need to better focus on which are the needs of especially the small cities. In our work, and this is the last thing, if I have to say, the main stakeholder, EEA, JRC, the Covenant of Mayor Office, are the leader of our action. And because it was indeed necessary to have someone that dealt with the EU perspective to work with the action starting for the global. So starting from the ground and trying to rise up to the global. And now I'm shut up me and for the further discussion. So thank you. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for presenting your course in such a passionate way, and you saw me nodding all the time, so we are definitely on the same page here. And when I mentioned this screening tool before, so this claim for it is you need not be a climate expert to assess the climate risks of your project. So this is what we have in mind with our clarity developments. So I asked Tantam to present and to have his course, please. So we are wide over time, but it's so interesting, and I think it's so important, and our audience stays with us. So thank you for being with us, and I guess that you think it's interesting and important as well. So please, Tantam.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. So I try to stick to the 3 minutes because I'm anxious to leave time for a panel discussion. So it's really a glimpse at what we are doing as a Yeti Climate Kick. So Yeti Climate Kick is, I'm thanks Herle. I'm the director of Yeti Climate Kick for France. And so Yeti Climate Kick is a knowledge and innovation community. So it's supported by the European Institute of Innovation and Technology. And it's working to accelerate the transition to a zero carbon economy and climate resilient societies. So our mandate is to identify and support innovation that helps society mitigate, but also adapt to climate change. To do this, we have brought together a community of about 400 partners across more than 30 countries. So they come from academia, from business, from the public and non-profit sectors to create networks of expertise, but really networks through which innovative products, services, and systems can be developed, brought to market and scaled up for impact. So what we've been doing in complement is also education programs, both in person across Europe and online. And the entrepreneurship programs have accelerated more than, I think, 1,500 startups over the years. So in terms of climate services, we've worked with and around them mostly in 2 directions so far. And I'm going to probably echo what has been said so far by other participants. So the first direction has been through innovation projects and programs. And let me give you just 2 examples to illustrate the approach involving different combinations of private sector engagement and public-private cooperation. The first one is a project called Oasis, which was mentioned by Adrian sooner, and which many of you must be familiar with. It started from the observation that catastrophe modeling was still limited by a lack of transparency and by protected data sources. So what the project built is an open source loss modeling framework that allowed users to feed in hazard, exposure, and vulnerability data and to calculate damage risk and the potential financial cost of events. Then the framework was backed by more than 100 insurance industry actors, and it was demonstrated in fire, flood, and city risk sectors. It launched a MOOC on modeling and an e-marketplace, which is now thriving, and it was embedded by international and multilateral development banks. Another project, which is more public driven, if you want, but still involving private partners, is Crazy Adapt. So it aims at enabling decision making on climate adaptation planning through real-time implementation and validation. And those are based on near and seasonal range forecasts of climate-related natural hazards. So 4 demonstrations are taking place right now in Spain, in Andalusia and the Valencian community, in Malta and Cyprus. But then the replicability of methods and results will be tested in 8 further regions, both in large metropoles, but also in small cities, which have just been alluded to, and through scaling existing tools such as MEET and CRIT. So the second direction we explored, and Adrian and Alessia have been mentioning that, is through the H2020 marker project, which Alessia knows inside out, of course. So this project gathered both the IT Climate Key partners and non-partners, including Adrian Institute, a consortium of market research firms, climate scientists, climate service practitioners, and innovation actors. And the aim was to assess the EU climate service market. So the originality was really to take an integrated approach, combining benchmarking existing suppliers and their business models, quantifying and qualifying climate service needs at EU level, and investigating case studies which were each of them linked to a sector and a geography. to forecast future user needs and assess market growth. And the ultimate goal, that is our common goal, I think, is to lead to market opportunities and promote market growth. So some of the main outcomes of Marco and its sister project EUMAX, which was coordinated by Adrian, have been analyzed and collected in a special issue of the Journal of Climate Services earlier this year, and you can see the link in the bottom right of my presentation. So I'd rather stop here and leave space for the panel discussion if there is still some.
So thank you very much for your presentations and for introducing your really exciting courses. I have some questions to all of you. Please let me direct my first question to Tantan. The EIC Climate Kick is a Europe-wide community, but it seems to be organized in a decentralized manner. How can the gap between scalable, affordable European climate innovations and fragmented local markets be bridged?
Yes, of course, it's a complex challenge, and I'm going to echo what Stefania in particular said. So working across Europe, as we do, allows us to, let's say, test similar innovation simultaneously in different climates, but also social and economic contexts, and that helps better identify generic patterns and features that can be that are very context specific. But market fragmentation is also, I think, multiplied by the usual juxtaposition of point solutions within sectoral and geographic silos, and that cannot allow to build coherent and viable mitigation and resilience trajectories. So what we try to do is to work in depth with so-called challenge owners, so that's regional leaders, city mayors, and their local communities to understand the main systems transformations they want to operate. And then, of course, climate service providers, purveyors, and potential users can use this kind of programs to identify which kind of information and services can be most relevant and test those services as components of connected interventions and not just as point innovations.
From your perspective, what are major market segments from a geographic perspective? So what do they have in common and what are the differences? So aside from the climate conditions. So if you had to compare, I don't know, Mediterranean and Scandinavia, but what are the...
Yes, so of course you have the climate conditions and sectoral needs, so water scarcity and fire risk is much higher in the south, but it's now migrating to Sweden, even in Finland probably. So I mean, Adrian said that the figures are always a bit tricky to deal with, but it's quite clear that the two largest markets for climate services right now in the EU are Germany and France, roughly 20% each, Spain and Italy about 12% each, then Benelux, Nordics, Poland. What is very interesting is that the remaining 10 countries in Central and Eastern Europe altogether represent less than 10% of the EU market. And I think it can be explained not by lesser climate risk because they have flooding and heat waves and water scarcity, but the traditional approach is driven by multi-year plans of state meteorological agencies. So it has its value, of course, but it's hardly complemented by any sizable markets. So in particular, when you look at the numbers of private climate service providers and purveyors, there are very few in those countries. So I think that the potential for market growth is particularly high in that part of Europe.
Thank you. Stefania, you fund the project by own financial means, if I got your presentations right. So what are the motives of the municipalities and which benefits have they envisaged for themselves? And do you estimate that the collaboration and the partnership will last beyond the project, and in which form could this be?
Well, I hope that you can hear me because I see that my image is, my screen is freezed better, if I have to be honest.
We hear you well.
Okay.
We can hear you well, thank you.
Yeah, perfectly. Exactly. We invest as a municipality really a lot of resources in working and dialing at this level in this partnership because we definitely were in the middle of our path. We already experimented what was dialing with the European project because we invested a lot on them in the past years. We take appropriate measure to cope with the emergency that we were living in that years on 2010, 2011, 2014 with flooding events and other disasters that absolutely break down our economy also. And in our roadmap, we start collaborating in partnership and try to opening and continues to learning by each other on how to solve the same issue that other cities has. And definitely we try to do something more, trying to speak the same language that the member states spoke, and also the politician at different levels spoke. We need to understand better why we were so lacking in the shift paradigm from coping to preventing. And so that's why this was the main reason that that push up and try to coordinate a partnership, especially to learning prior to teaching. And this collaboration testified that a lot of people could work together if they believed that the common achieved goals could be reached by especially comparison. And I have to be honest, it was indeed so marvelous to see how the DG representative was so kind and near to us in learning also, and in listening to our needs as a city, and also explaining that not everything could be done in a few, but we need to take the common path and co-working with them. So this was the main message. And we see, because during that year the revision of the EU adaptation strategies move on, and also the public consultation on this finished last a few weeks ago now, and also the results of our work will be embedded in that main document that will foster a good future, we hope, for all of us, because we are also waiting for them also to boost at national level our national adaptation plan. Not all the countries has, and this is essential, because having exactly what you told before, standard, and the terms that means the same things in all the contexts, will allow also to us to name the things in the same way. Not to interpret them in so many different ways, but concretely in recognizing exactly things and possibilities. We would like to we would like to go forward in our work. It was foreseen that we had to finish on July of this year, but also due to the fact that during the emergency of the COVID-19 that affect all the world and also the EU, we have also to postpone some activities, especially the dissemination one and the co-working part of our work, also of our partners, because as you can imagine, Eurocities, CEMR, a lot of works related to the Directorate General has been stopped, and they are waiting, well, how to restart and trying to go to move forward. Yeah. And we also understand that exactly as the long-term strategy means long-term year, we also need some more time to achieve more results and to make the critical mass to try also to put on the ground now for the other cities what we are already doing. So this is my. So we would like to work for 1 year more, 1 year and a half more together on a voluntary basis.
Okay. Yeah. You mentioned that one of your main target groups are smaller cities with scarce resources. So how can they benefit at the European scale and even beyond Europe from your work? And what do you think? Are they encouraged to contribute, or are they only more on the receiving side?
No, the benefits, first of all, are in the capacity building field. So we have a lot of action that work and dial with the main actors that are more linked to the small cities. So the national municipality and sub-municipality association. And we envisage, also thanks to DG Climate, to train the trainer, first of all. So before we have to train exactly all of them. And we are doing this in order that they can transfer knowledge on what is existing, what they could do, and especially related to the climate services. We are working in how to make the main platform that already exists more readable, okay, and understandable for the small municipalities. Because the issue is that you have that you need some skilled technician to better understand what they have to do, but also what they can do. And your paradigm that you know don't need to be so expert to understand the issue and to understand what you can you can do. I think that in your platform is quite clear. This it is a usable platform, so it looks nice. And EEA, for instance, in the partnership, they revised completely during the work the Climate Adapt platform, because they know that there are not so many followers, not so many users, because the things are made only in English. And if I have to say, the national language is an issue for the small cities, because you don't have so skilled staff that can deal with those so many issues. They also have to understand things that in a language that is different from yours means something maybe different too. Having also the Diputació of Barcelona, it is a marvelous example, because they deal with the small municipality. And so they use a collaborative approach to try to train the municipalities, the small one, and try to analyze if using that training, using that tools that they prepare, they could be more successful also in the application phase, for instance, for the LIFE program, or in the operational plan for the municipalities, and the RTF funds application, and so on. So they are not only receiving and.
Yeah, thank you. Tantam, we learned about the position of smaller cities a lot right now, and the meaning of the regional anchor, the local anchorage, and the language, and so. How can communities like Climate Kick and other platforms support them in the most effective way?
Yes, well, I think I started to describe what we are doing now, which was those deep demonstration programs. So really working with a city, typically a municipality or a region, to go deep into what they want to transform. So obviously we can't do that in every city, but we really try to do it not just in big cities, but also in smaller cities and medium-sized cities, where the time to decision is quicker. Then something we can really do, and that echoes what Stefania said, is in fact that what is key is really to identify and provide the individual solutions, but also to co-design climate services with local actors in terms that they understand. And very often the challenges are not climate driven. So the point is, how do you bring climate information to a question which is not about climate? And then another thing that we've been doing, in particular in Italy, actually, is that our Italian colleagues have built this kind of network of medium-sized cities. But it's not just another network. It's really a network that takes in its hands to deal with this kind of systems transformation for climate. And in fact, for that, the climate services, again, have to be very locally tailored. That's not something we can do by ourselves as a platform, but what we can do is really to process with them how you can come closer to your needs and how you can make non-specialist users take ownership of the possibilities of climate services. And actually, it's not just theory, it's starting to work, and that's what we're trying to do.
Do you think that something that the myclimateservices.eu platform and marketplace can be helpful in that respect?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, after the H2020 project, Marco, we suggested to build an observatory which is more on the market conditions. So it's something that would, allow to navigate in this fragmented climate service market landscape and provide the community with a trusted intelligence on the market conditions and so on. And in fact, I think something like the platform that you presented is absolutely complementary, I think, because this is in practice, how do you access the right services? How do you train yourself to use them? How do you, in fact, just change the mindset of, I'm a climate scientist, I can give you the information you need to, well, actually I have needs that don't say climate. And in fact, how can you help me address this need? And you will help the climate in the same direction. So I think really, definitely what we have developed is called the Climate Compass. But I think if you put that, My Climate Services together, you can make sense of this landscape of climate services and just make it accessible to people who really need them. What is very interesting we saw in Marco is that many of the current users, I don't mean the potential users, but many of the current users of climate services don't even know they're using climate information. So then the question is, should you just forget about climate? No, you shouldn't. But in fact, you have to find ways to look from their perspective, not start from the climate information and try to feed them with it, but actually start from topics which you know have something to do with climate and find it in their own terms. So yeah, definitely, I think the this combination of platforms would be, I think, a big step forward.
Thank you. Alessia, a vibrant climate services market and wide implementation of climate strategy in diverse sectors and infrastructure project is crucial. So which measures are planned to support this, and how will they complement with national programs?
Yes, this is rather complex matter, and I'll start to mention some precondition. I would like to say that now the climate change is pretty high in the political agenda. This was not always the case in the last years, and President von der Leyen put it at the core of the European Green Deal, that is really at the heart of the political program of the current Commission. And we had also grassroots movement like the Fridays for Future. So now we are living the emergency of COVID and seems to be a bit forgotten, but I see it is pretty high on the political agenda, and this is really something we should not forget and build upon. And indeed, in the European Green Deal, you will have there are a number of sectors mentioned, and we are putting forward a specific Green Deal call to support this transition to happen. And the knowledge is not only the climate-related knowledge. I mean, the other panelists said it pretty clear, is how to embed the climate signal in the current practices of users, in the risk management strategies, in their operation and maintenance decision, in the insurance sector, in the financial, in how the investment are planned. So this is something that we'll try to tackle from our perspective. That the research and innovation funding program is what I can discuss now. And in the new financial framework with Horizon Europe, we are trying to, while not forgetting the scientific challenge that are still there, to tackle the barriers to innovation. And an important component has been mentioned is the peer-to-peer learning, the capacity building some framework that can enable this upscaling and replication of experience. And now I would like to put a bit talk on my personal capacity, and important, not as a Commission, European Commission representative, and there are gaps across Europe and across sectors. And then, well, we are not talking about excellent research, but we are talking about impact-oriented research. We'll have to cope with this gap, and this is where we can have still the larger margin for building resilience. I have no doubt that a big multinational will be able to build in-house climate services, even, or in-house capacity. And so there are also some very, very strong public sector reality in some countries. But Europe is very diverse on that respect, and we should really strive at reaching where the highest need is. So this is a challenge, and this entails a lot of coordination with structural funding, with national programs, and is the way forward, but obviously it's not so easy to achieve, but we are working on that, so to speak.
Adrian, may I invite you for the panel as well for one question?
Sorry, I was muted as well.
Yeah. So how do you see the role of the financial sector, including in the insurance sector, in relation to regional and local climate initiatives and the related information needs, as the financial sector is waking up to thorough climate risk monitoring?
Yeah, this is a very important point. I'd like to take the opportunity to link still to what Alessia just said, and also Stefania earlier on. I think it gets also very important for the sort of climate service development community to really be much more aware of all the other sort of support instruments that there are at EU level. We tend, of course, to look to Horizon, to GPI and that kind of things, EIT, but Life Plus, Interreg, and especially if I think of what Stefania tries to accomplish, so the deployment of these services and taking care of the learning, and also indeed through peer processes and so on. Also, there have been in other areas have been twinning programs really, and that kind of ideas could be important also to this area, I think. And so that I hope that this sort of diversity of instruments available, we really start to learn that and try to implement that. But now to your question, sorry. Yeah. Of course, there are several sectors where can still happen a lot more, or also like tourism, for example. But two very important sectors for our well-being are indeed the financial sector and the health sector. And both sectors have so strong own information and risk assessment systems that for a long time they were also a little bit sort of not so easily accessible to get them into this climate services process. But I don't say anything more about health. Also there are things happening, but also that is indeed challenging. But the financial sector has now really started to move. An important element was this task force for climate-related financial disclosure. That's really a sort of global initiative to come up with recommendations how the financial sector should start to monitor risks related to climate policy and to climate change as such. We have seen also that it was a bit difficult in the beginning. The emphasis was really more on the changes brought about by climate policy, so like going out of fossil fuels, for example, and what that may mean for all kinds of asset owners. But fortunately, more recently, and also the realization that there is also a remaining climate change risk, which can affect productivity and asset values in all kinds of ways, has now got that closer. And you see now in a lot of countries, you see a lot of effort, and also internationally, initiatives to come up with programs already, and sort of, if in a little bit, sort of roadmaps, at least in that direction, it's going to how you could start to develop indicator sets that are then enable the financial sector to generate monitoring systems about these risks. That's a long process, because like level playing field concepts are very important in the financial sector. But at the same time, that would mean, because the information should be very reliable and replicable, and you should trust that it's also available in 5 or 10 years. That means enormous opportunities for climate services providers. So this sector is very important, but it means, and the initiatives that are going on now, it's really important from the climate service community also to link up to that. There are several doing that, but I think this discourse should be still increased, also to make sure in that we have common understanding in what are sensible ways to share information, because that will be probably one of the big issues, how different partners will understand to what extent you can share information for free or for a reasonable payment, and not to make it all the time too exclusive, because in the long run that would not help resilience. But on the other hand, if you would make everything free for everybody, that may stall, in fact, innovation and the spread of climate services as well. So how do we see this balance? And especially in this financial sector, this is probably important. And that links also, I think, if you think of the built environment. So in Stefania's example of cities and more also smaller cities, but even there, even though per city the financial amounts are perhaps smaller in smaller cities, but on the other hand, a lot of smaller cities may also be cash strapped, so they may even be more depending on the financial sector directly or indirectly. So also that kind of linkages between these different segments in how they deal with things, because it means like in urban planning and in urban management, you have to take care that risks are getting transparent, and that would also help to communicate with the financial sector how you would develop, in fact, adaptation plans and finance them. Okay, I think I said enough for the time being.
Thank you. Yeah. So we are coming. So it is really very interesting to have this this webinar with you folks, and we are well over time, but most of our participants stayed with us, so I guess they find it interesting as well. One last question for a sort of a closing remark to all of you. Think about local SME as climate service provider and public services as procurers, and envisage co-creation for cross-sector innovation development. Which measures will reinforce this? What are the barriers to overcome? What do you think? What will be your contribution as your organization? So please have your say from your projects or organizations perspective. This question is for all of you, and it's sort of a closing remark as well.
If you give me the possibility, I will go first, also because I will have to leave you pretty soon. So
yeah, sure.
As I say, I want to say something. We learned a lot during the previous programming period, the 7 years that we are at the end of the 7-year programming. We learned thanks to the project, we have representative there, so now we can really build on. We are more aware of the barriers, we are more aware of the problems that is a part of the solution. The barriers are there to overcome, and we are looking into that. I will mention, for example, the quality assurance and standards that can have an important role in enabling the scaling up of the services. One other important thing not to forget is the capacity building. As a research and innovation program is not our main, let's say, goal, but it's something that we're trying to support because we see the need to have a really widespread boosting resilience and capacity to cope with the climate change risk. So this is something not to be forgotten, and I think in the post-COVID recovery effort, this could play an important role as economic driver as well, this transition to a more resilient and climate neutral economy. So there are challenges, but there's still a lot of to do, but we learned, and we can, I mean, we are better equipped now to take the challenge forward.
Stefania, what's the position of a municipality as a procurer or public procurer on that? So, and the regulations, how is this different, or how is this contradiction to innovation and co-creation? I guess that you tackled this in your project pretty well, but anyway, there are framework conditions you have to consider.
Well, I can testify that what we did as a municipality. Hello, Alessia.
It's been a pleasure. I know Adrian and Tantam, and also to meet Stefania. We'll be in touch in the future, I'm sure.
Yes, for sure.
Bye.
For sure. Well, what I can testify is that dealing with the main 3 drivers of change for a city, so the climate change, the demographic change, and the digital transition, that are the main issue that every city is more or less, also the health issue, but the health issue is embedded also in that. To foster a resilient, sustainable economic development, to reach a better 2030 and 2050 main goal, it is essential to think about and to rethink the business modeling, also to develop a new city skyline, working with this me, exactly as in your question is, with new kind of procurement, okay, with new kind of partnership procurement. So working also in a different way with the private sectors, because indeed, in a period where a municipality has less money because the money, especially for 2 years, are blocked or are money that are needed to reboot the system with the living with the COVID-19 now pandemic issue, and not forgetting what was the issue before the COVID, especially climate change related effect, so we don't have to forget it. So how to combine all the issues that are striving and stressing a city ecosystem with the perspective of the resilient, sustainable economic development. Only working together with the partners that you already has in your territory. For one reason, you as a municipality has to think to the people. They don't have to lose the work. They have also to convert their business model in something that is new. So the municipality acts as a facilitator, because it is in the middle from the private sector on one hand, from the citizen perspective of the other, and also it has the possibility to dial also, especially with others that has the same problem. So the measures are especially related to what Alessia told you before: capacity building investments, soft skill investments, and reinforcing the governance system of the city. Working in networking, well, working in networking is quite a funny phrase, but it means that opening the mind and opening to new collaboration. So also the contamination in this case is of the mind perspective on how to dial with the SME that locally are familiar with a business model, and you have to tell to them that they have to change it. You have to work with them, co-working, in trying to reshaping your territory. So this is the main issue from a local perspective. Indeed, working with the national level together with, we are doing this. And especially on the climate-related field, if we will be successful in transforming the issue of a problem in a resource and a value, so which is the value of adaptation to climate change, which is the value of the transformation. Something could be monetized, something instead is not possible to, the co-benefit are not monetizable. And this indeed is something that has been translated into concrete and standard measure for all the different levels, especially the private sectors, because they are more sensitive now, as the politician too. That is.
Okay, thank you. Tantan?
Sorry. Yeah, I said I was going to just summarize some points. So I think what we need to manage is to address simultaneously two challenges that seem divergent. So one is to help isolated providers and purveyors who have limited time and resource to better navigate the emerging but still immature market of climate services, as Adrian explained, and to help potential non-specialist users to find services that speak to their needs. Again, not necessarily marked climate all over. And the other is to integrate the development of climate services, but more broadly of climate action, in a much more systemic and integrated approach. And in fact, so what we can help with, I think the first point is really this making sense of the landscape of climate information and information on the market of climate services. So in Marco, we identified like 14 different components, and what my climate services is addressing is one of the core components there, which is a marketplace component. But then you still need to have this navigation, not makes things more complicated, but simpler. So I think that's really the first point we're trying to work on with the climate compass. And the second point is what we try to do with deep demonstrations with cities and regions, as I described. So it's not only to say, let's be systemic and address everything at the same time, but what kind of system do you want to move to? And what does it tell you on the levers you want to activate simultaneously? And I think it relates also to the question on the role of the financial sector. There is one thing that the financial sector is already trying to do, and I mean, Oasis is a good example, is to change the mindsets within the financial innovation. So that's very important. You bring more transparency, etc. But there is another part which I'm trying to push our financial interlocutors to do, is to combine financial innovation with sectoral innovation, with climate services, with resilience plans. And in fact, you have to experiment because you don't know it's chicken and egg. You don't know, you can't tell that's what you need to change in finance and then everything will happen. And it doesn't work the other way around either. So really what we try to do with the deep demonstrations is to put those actors together to experiment, address some of the challenges we don't have the answer for, but just try different combinations. And I think climate services have a very decisive role to play there because they have to be simple, they have to be usable by non-specialists, and they will tell you what can really happen on the ground and what cannot.
Okay, thank you. Excellent answer. Adrian?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's keep it short. Well, FMI, also thanks to what we learned in the past few years, indeed, is sort of shaping up its climate services strategy, you could say, trying to take into account this diversity in a systematic way and build all kinds of collaborative structures with that, and at the same time, of course, still be sensitive also to all the in-house knowledge of new ideas, how you could improve climate services and so on. And, yeah. Another aspect, I think it's really important that we also try to be really supportive in this incorporation and sort of these transparency enhancing initiatives, because I think that's really important. One way or the other, all the time, it has to do that at both sides, supplier and user side, it's very hard to understand where to find the most relevant things or where to find the most relevant application areas also. And this also means a very practical suggestion in this case would be that next to, because now we have been often referring to hubs in a geographical sense, regional, national, or whatever. But that means I think there is also a lot of options to, not necessarily detached from the other ones, but another way to look to hubs is to look to hubs in more a thematic or a sectoral way. So like finance or health or sort of problem areas where different regions could learn from the same kind of initiatives in various places in Europe. Or you could even have like cash-strapped municipalities or whatever you have.
Yeah. So frugal adaptation.
That's a very nice word. I like that.
Frugal adaptation. Okay, great. Thank you very much. It was very interesting, and so my closing remark is that what we estimated in the Clarity project and what we thought about with the marketplace and with the collaboration, and so this is reflects pretty much. So we managed to do it dead on. Reflects very much what you told about your projects and initiatives and your experiences. So I'm very encouraged now to follow up on this way, and we will move further and try to implement as many ideas that we had. And I hope that there is collaboration among us on the road for all of us. And I thank to the audience who stayed so long, and thank you very much for being with us. As mentioned before, you will get the whole follow-up and information package by email. I kindly ask you to fill in the parting survey at the end of the webinar, and I hope that we will have many of you in our diverse and joint climate service market initiatives and activities in the future, and then we can shape something together. That's my belief. So thank you very much for being with us, and take care. We are closing now. Special thanks to the panel and to Adrian for joining me with a very interesting opening and keynote remarks. And thank you for sharing your project and your thoughts on that. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.